Hello, huddlers. I'm excited to introduce you to April Dunford, except for Peter Finter, who worked with her here. But other than that, April is a world-renowned expert in product positioning and marketing strategy, particularly for B2B technology companies. She spent over 25 years leading marketing, product, and sales teams at several successful tech startups. April is the author of two successful books, which you can see in her beautifully arranged background. I have one of them here called Sales Pitch, How to Craft a Story to Stand Out and Win. And that's the one we'll be focusing on today, and how marketing leaders can build effective sales pitches that reflect a company's positioning and differentiate it from competitors, which is that thing in Chief Marketing Officer, the marketing part of marketing. So April, welcome. How are you and where are you this fine day?
Oh, this is great to be here. I'm coming to you direct from Toronto, Ontario. It's very snowy, and I've been sick with a cold all week, so
Oh, I'm
that's
sorry.
terrible. But this is when you're glad you're doing it on Zoom and you're not all in a room for me to give you my germs.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, so between your cold and my jet lag, we're going to be quite a pair today, but I know we can make this work. So let's,
Good, we'll muscle through it.
yeah,
We got this.
yes, we've got this. So
Me, Drew.
just in case our audience has to leave early or we need to convince them to stay, could we start with sort of three mistakes that you see marketers making today that you address in your book, and just outline the mistakes, and then we'll go through them one by one.
Yeah, sure. The whole reason I've written this sales pitch book came out of my big mistake, which was treating positioning as a thing that really only marketing has to worry about. So there's
Okay.
mistake number one.
Okay.
The second one is assuming that if I armed the sales team with the positioning stuff, they would then do something with it. That was mistake number two. Um, and then mistake number three is like if you're going to tackle the how does positioning show up in sales, it means you're going to have to tackle the problem of how do we build a sales pitch. And the mistake that most folks make there is they're building a pitch without a structure.
Mm, okay. All right. Those are meaty, and I love that. And so let's get to them. Uh, and we've seen this, and I'm sure some heads will nod with our live audience, where CMO spends a tremendous amount of time getting the positioning just where they got it. They
Yeah.
get buy-in on the positioning,
Yeah.
and it just stops right there.
And it just stops. So this was, I don't know, somewhat surprising to me. Like one of the things that I see but particularly back when I was in-house working at startups, the sales teams do so much training. Like they do training, like in a way that we don't do in marketing. Like, so they all go off and do Sandler sales training, or they were doing Challenger sales training, or they've got some good, they all went and did medic training, or, whatever the flavor of the month is. So they do all this training. And I just kind of had this assumption, like in part of all of this training would be, how do we build a pitch so that if marketing comes at you with this positioning stuff, like I can work on the positioning stuff, I'm going to throw it over to sales, and sales is going to know what to do with it because, you know, they've been trained. And it turns out that's not true. So when I first started doing positioning work at startups, we would focus on the positioning, we would do the positioning, and we would have sales in the room. And sales would get all excited about it and go, yes, oh man, yeah, love the value propositions. We love it. And, we get segmentation of which customers we're going after and clarification on who our competitors are. And this is great. And then we walk out of the room and marketing, goes and does their thing on the website and, like you say, crafts everything, make it all perfect and all this stuff. They're running campaigns and doing all these things. And then you look at what's going on in sales and you're like, no positioning at all. We're doing a tour of the product. Here's 59 drop down menus, and I'm clicking on all 59 and I'm talking about every single one of those features like they're equal. And so that was a surprise to me. I just figured, the reason things were bad over in sales is because we were giving them lousy inputs. If we fixed the inputs, then they would just fix themselves. And the answer was no, they don't.
Okay. So great positioning, always important. We can't do a good sales pitch without it,
Yeah.
but we have to get the positioning to the sales team. So
Yeah.
what's that about, and where do we get to sort of some success in
Yeah.
that?
So the idea, so then it became apparent to me. So I'd work with these companies. We work on the positioning stuff, and then you check back in a few weeks, and they'd be like, "Well, marketing's fixed. We're all happy about what's going on in marketing, but nothing's changed over in sales." And so, how are we going to fix that? And so I thought, okay, well, the big thing we need to do, like step one, is we need to do a better job on a first substantive sales call. This is the sales call where the prospect has been lightly qualified. We haven't done deep discovery yet, but we're going to have a first call, and the first call is all about like, you know, here's who we are. This is what we do at a million-foot level. We're going to do some discovery, whatever. And then we might have, if this enterprise software, we might have called 2, 3, 4 after that. And those calls, we're going to get into something that's really tailored and to the customer and their particular thing. But that first call is generally kind of boilerplate, right? And so what we really want to do, that's where positioning really matters in that first call. So we can't just give the sales reps the positioning and have them figure out how to put it in a pitch. They don't know how to do it.
Hmm.
And so what we have to do is give them a pitch that maps to the positioning. And then if we're going to do that, it has to follow a structure. Like it can't just be, here's some ideas and you can get at them wherever and, or try to fit them into the existing product walkthrough demo, which is likely what they're doing. It actually has to be a sales pitch with like a beginning and a middle and an end where we're kind of telling this story of, here's what we built. Here's why we built it. Here's how we're different than the other folks. And here's why you should pick us versus the other alternatives you could potentially go after.
So I'm wondering, I was just thinking that for the CMOs in the audience right now is, do they understand what a sales pitch is and what those pieces are? I mean, I think they understand brand narrative, they understand various aspects of
Right.
storytelling, but literally, as you talk about in your book, putting together a sales pitch storyboard. In your experience, do marketers know how to do that?
Well, I don't think we generally have a lot of experience at it because again, like for a good part of my career, there was this sales pitch that existed. Like it was around.
Right.
And then if you would do this shift on positioning and then you go try to mess with the sales pitch and the sales team would be like, don't touch it. We don't want, and I think part of the reason for that is that the sales team doesn't think that marketing understands what they do in a first sales call.
Right.
And they're worried it's not going to tick their boxes. Like, for example, in a first substantive sales call, you need to understand what qualification has already happened. And if we're going to do discovery, the discovery needs to be baked into the pitch somewhere. There needs to be a spot where you can do discovery. And then if we're going to do a demo, we need to think about how does that demo need to be structured? What do we need to accomplish? If there are, for example, objections, like obviously the sales rep's going to handle objections as they come up, but often we have big unspoken objections that we really need to put to bed in the first sales call or we don't get a second sales call. That needs to go somewhere in the pitch. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't typically deal with when we're worried about narratives on the marketing side of the house, but we absolutely have to consider if we're going to build a good sales pitch. So when I first started looking at this, I thought, well, there's got to be a sales pitch structure out there that I can just steal and I'll figure out how we work the positioning stuff into that. And to my shock, there isn't. Like if you go looking out there, there is no kind of accepted sales pitch structure that like most software companies use out there, which I thought was incredible. And so I thought, well, what we actually need is a structure that meets all the needs of the sales team, but gives us on the marketing side a way to represent our positioning in a form that works for the sales team, if you get what I mean.
I do. And it's funny because what I hear a lot is the CMOs talking with their sales, working out on something that we'll use the term messaging. That's part one, and battle cards, part two, right? Those are the sort
Yeah.
of, and we get those, but it doesn't feel like what you're describing. So I think
Right.
even though I have a lot of other questions that I want to get at that are important, I think we probably should get into what that structure is so that we
Sure.
just nail that right now.
Sure. So, so as a background to this, so when I was working in-house, I worked at 7 different startups, and then a bunch of big companies because all the startups I worked at got acquired. And then since I've been a consultant, I've done positioning work, and so also to have worked on sales pitch stuff with about 300 companies. I've been doing this for about 10 years. And only 2 of those companies had a sales pitch, and they're all enterprise software. So I don't actually take you as a client if you don't have a sales team. So they all got sales teams. They all got a sales pitch. Only 2 of those had a sales pitch built with any structure. 2. And that includes some very big
Two
companies.
out of 300?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of an opening for you, isn't it?
And
Wow.
so, but one of them was IBM. And
Right.
interestingly, IBM is where I learned that was the first time that I ever had to build a sales pitch with a structure. So up until IBM, I had never built a sales pitch with a structure. Like we would have kind of a light structure. Like sometimes we would do this like problem solution, but our problem solution was not very good. Like so at one point I was working at a startup and we sold databases. And so the problem slide went like this. Man, there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot. That's the problem. Data, and it's growing. It's growing like this. We actually had a chart. This is how much data in enterprise stores is going like this. And so you need a database to store that. And so any one of our competitors could have said the same thing. Like we all had the same problem definition. So there's nothing differentiating in the way we described the problem. Um, and then some folks will do this day in the life thing. Like here's how you log in. This is the first thing you do. This is the second thing you do. And that's okay too. But again, doesn't necessarily highlight where you're different. Why pick us versus the other guys? Like your competitors could probably walk through the same day in the life. Um, so then I went to IBM, and IBM had this thing where they always started with their point of view on the problem, which is kind of a subtle sort of shift on it, but it was cool. Like we never walked in and said, like I went to IBM, and I was selling a database there, and we would never walked in and said, "Whoa, there's lots of data." So instead, we said, "Why are we saving all this data?" Because we know we're saving it, man. It's going like this. Why are we doing that? It's because we think data is going to be a strategic asset in the future. We're going to do AI on this stuff. We're going to do machine learning on this stuff. Like it's a strategic asset. So if we think about data as a kind of a foundation for innovation, what should a database do? Well, it should be really open for starters. So it should work with anything that we're going to do now, but in the future, it's going to last us forever. And that was very specific. We opened with that because our big competitor was Oracle, and we were way more open than they were.
Right.
And so we try to make openness the foundation of everything. And so that's a neat trick to define the problem that it advantages you right from the beginning. So if I can convince you that openness should be your key purchase criteria, then I got the deal. So I love that about IBM. They always started with this, our perspective on the problem. And then we try to convince you that our point of view is the way to look at it. And then if you agreed with our point of view, then we'd say, okay, great, let me show you how we do it. So I like that. And then the other thing that the IBM folks did was they never talked about a feature outside of differentiated value. They would always say, look, here's the 3 reasons why you should pick us. This is the value you're going to get from us that you're not going to get from anybody else. And we're only going to show you how we do that. All the other stuff that's table stakes for the category that everyone does, that's whatever, we didn't spend 10 seconds on that. Whereas every other company I worked at, we spent a lot of time on table stakes stuff. We thought we had to show you all the things.
Well, and by the way, if there's one set of words from your book that stood out, and it's funny, I marked it, but let's see. Yes, there it is. Helping customers understand the value only you can deliver should be the centerpiece of everything you do in marketing and sales. That's it. You don't need to read the book. That's it. That is the goal.
It.
Business value only you can deliver.
Business
And
value only you can deliver. Like that
right,
is the
and
answer to the question. Like a lot of what we're doing, if you look at what happens in a first substantive sales pitch for in most companies, it's like the sales team is trying to answer the question, why pick us? And that seems logical, except if we're in enterprise software, we're B2B, the question the customer has is not why pick us. The question they have is why pick us over the other guys? Because they're looking at a short list. We're never the only one on the list. Even if the other alternative is do it with a spreadsheet or use the clunky old legacy thing I'm doing right now. Like they're making a comparison to something else. And so we got to answer that question if we're going to win the deal. Like that's what wins us the deal. So if we're going to answer that, we got to understand what our differentiated value is. And then we got to build a story around that. So if my differentiated value is we're the most open thing on the planet, well, I got to tell you a story that explains why openness is so important. And that's got to be my whole pitch. Your rep will not necessarily understand that, right? Your rep is often trained to sell like what we have is a consulting engagement and we can do anything. So they go in and they're like, tell me your problems. Oh, this is your problems. Oh, we got solutions for that. Instead of taking control of the deal and saying, look, we know you're in here to look at my product. Let me tell you a story about how this whole market maps out and why we built the thing the way we did. And this is why we think your purchase criteria should look like this. And if I can't get you, like if openness is my big thing and I can't get you jazzed about openness, I've disqualified you. We shouldn't be chasing that deal because if you don't care about openness, we're not going to win.
It's so important that because when we've talked a lot about in recent weeks, it's not about more pipeline, it's about better pipeline, and it's about so the folks that are in your pipeline that you're actually trying to close are ones that you can close and you can win
Right.
and you can keep them. I think
Yeah.
it's interesting, and I think a lot of folks struggle with this, which is you talk about it's impossible to differentiate yourself without addressing the alternatives. And I want to just dive into that a little bit more. So, in the context of openness in the IBM example, I'm assuming you have to literally say, oh, and by the way, Oracle not open. Do you have to overtly refer to your customers and make it clear that
Yeah.
open, not open?
Wait, let me give you another example
Okay.
because in this case, it was so in the case of IBM, we knew they were looking at Oracle. So like,
Right.
if we could say Oracle because we knew you were looking at Oracle. Like, and so there's this thing in a sales situation. If you know the customer has somebody on a short list, there's no risk in mentioning it. But if you're not sure a particular competitor is on the short list or not, the last thing you want to do is mention it because it will make the buyer feel like they haven't done their homework. And they'll be like, whoops, wait a minute. I never heard of that. Wait, stop the whole process now. Now I got to go back and spend 2 weeks researching that thing because maybe it should be on my list. Like, you don't want to do that. But I'll give you an example. Often we don't have to say the competitor by name. What we're doing is we're not actually competing with companies. What we're competing with are alternative approaches to the problem. And so most of the time we can have this discussion like that. So I'll give you an example. So I worked with this company. This was a few years back. They've now been acquired by Salesforce, which is why they don't care if I give their example anymore. But so they're in the sales enablement space. The company was called Level Jump. Sales enablement space is terrible. Like there's so many competitors in there. Lots of venture money flew into that space at one point. And so there's just a lot of competitors and they all kind of look the same. These folks level jump. It's the smallest one in the bunch. And and when we first did the positioning work, it was very hard to understand how they were different than anyone else. So first we did the positioning work, and on the surface there was a lot of feature function stuff that was overlap. The key thing that they had though is they were the only sales enablement software. And when we say sales enablement, think like sales onboarding, like training for the sales rep to get the sales rep up to speed so that they know how to sell. They were the only one that was built on Salesforce. Now, all the other sales enablement tools were not built on Salesforce.
Right.
And so when we were trying to figure out what the differentiated value, like that's the feature, right? So what's the value? So the question is, so what? And so when I first went to the team and I'm like, so what? The team was a bit like, well, you don't have to log into another tool in order to do sales enablement. I'm like, that's weak. Is it really that hard to log into? Like, that can't be the only thing we've got. And the founder, so the founder leaned in and said, no, 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 that's actually not the big value. The big value is because we're all together, the data is all together. And I'm like, okay, so what on that? So what if the data is all together? Well, he says, because the data is all together, you can actually measure the results of sales enablement with your sales data. So I can say, did the training improve time to first deal? Did the training improve time to make quota? Like these are numbers that you care about with sales enablement. And so they're the only one that can actually prove that. And I'm like, wow, like that sounds like big value. But the problem is like most folks aren't thinking about that when they're evaluating sales enablement software because none of the other sales enablement software does that. So when we looked at the landscape of all the other sales enablement software packages out there, they basically fell into two categories. Half of them were essentially a CMS, like a content management system, like a
Yep.
fancy CMS, where you could just keep track of, do salespeople have the right version of the materials, and do they have access to it and anywhere they need it, and blah blah blah. So there's CMS. So that's approach number one. And you could list all the companies in there, but there was like 5 or 6, and they're all just basically a CMS. Or if you were getting really fancy, there was this other category of solutions, and they were at full blown LMS, like a learning management system, where you
Right.
could set up a course and you could send the reps through a course and you could see how far they got in the course and which things they looked at and what they did, and you get all fancy. So when they did this sales pitch, their setup on the sales pitch would go into that, and they wouldn't name the actual competitors, but they would teach the customer. They'd say, look, like, sales. And so they're selling to the head of sales enablement. They come in and they'd say, hey, head of sales enablement, sales enablement is really important, right? And they're like, yeah, no shit, buddy. That's my job. Yeah, it is really important. And they'd say, why is it important? It's important because every day your rep's not making quota costs you money. That's why it's important. And they had this great calculator that would show you, like, if you could get them ramped up a week faster, how much money you would save depending on the number of reps you had. But basically, every day your rep's not making quotas costing you money. Now, you got choices. There's choices in the market. In fact, there's loads of choices in the market. But let's talk about it. First category is CMSs, and they're great. If you got a small sales team and not too much stuff to teach them, you can put the stuff in there and it'll keep track of it and make sure they've got the right thing and the right version of the thing and whatever. Or if you want to get really fancy, your team's a bit bigger, you might do an LMS. And the LMS, you can make courses, you can see exactly what it's through, all that stuff. You know what none of those things does? When your boss comes and asks you, how did the training go? Is it making an impact? How do you prove it? You can't. Don't you wish you had that? Let me show you.
So
And then they
there's a
make the
couple
whole
things,
pitch
right?
around this thing that they can do that no one else can. And so the setup of that pitch, they kind of paint this picture of the market. They put everybody into a couple of buckets. So if the customer mentions the name, like they say, oh, well, we use Seismic, and they go, oh yeah, Seismic, they're great, they fit here. Or they say, oh, we use, Mind Tickle. Oh yeah, they're one of these, they fit over here.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so a couple things that I wanted to, I guess put a pin in to
I
use
hope
the
Seismic's
cliche.
not on the call, or Mind
Uh,
Tickle.
uh,
Sorry, Seismic and Mind Tickle.
they could be. They're a member of the community, but that's okay. It's all
But
good.
it's fine. They got acquired by Salesforce, and now you don't
Yes,
have to worry about it
exactly. And
anymore. Yeah.
we all know that that's the death of lots of
We
brands.
don't know. We don't know what happens after that, other than the
uh,
founder is rich and,
yes, and God bless. But there are a couple of things that you went through that I think I just want to remind. So there was like 3 levels of so what. And I think that's really important as you're looking at this thing. And I'm thinking about the new CMOs on the job. It's like when they get the pitch, it's like, so what, so what, so what. So you had to get
yeah,
down there. And then when we get down to the so what, it was interesting is like that so what might not, you're not in the same place as your buyer. You have to help them get there, which is where this sort of helping them understand the market, the landscape. Well, yeah, you can go here, but, and you
right.
could go here, but, and then in the process of, so your so what gets you to a unique position. But if the market's not ready for it, you have to bring them along. Okay.
Well, you're going to have to teach them. That's the
Teach them.
thing. So a lot of what we're doing in a good sales pitch is we're looking at the differentiated value and we're saying, what does my customer need to understand in order to understand why that value is critical? And so in the case of IBM, we'd look at the differentiated value and we say, Well, it's openness. And then you say, well, what does the customer have to understand? Well, they got to be thinking about the future. They got to
Right.
be thinking about what they're going to do with this data 10 years from now. And I got to wake them up to that, because they got Oracle on the other side saying, hey, you know what's better? Having all your stuff all integrated, and don't worry about working with anything else, because it's cheaper if you just buy it all. So they're over there selling on price, right?
Right.
And I'm selling this dream of the future where I'm like, dude, you're saving all this data. You're going to want to do with it something with it at some point. So I got to make the whole pitch about that. In the case of Level Jump, I'm looking at, well, I've got this, we're the only ones built on Salesforce. Therefore, we can show the value of the sales enablement training and where it's working and where it isn't. So, we're the only ones that do that. So no one's looking at that. No one has that on their list of requirements. So I got to wake the client up to that and say, hey, like when your boss asks you, what do you do? And the sales enablement person is going to go, I don't know, man. I don't do any. I don't know. I show them how many people took the thing, but I can't. I don't know if it's working or not. And I gotta I gotta come put them on the spot and say, don't you want that?
Yeah, it reminds me of some of of creating a buyer's guide where you set the framework of the criteria for them, and there's
Yeah.
only you're the only one that can win based on those criteria.
Yeah, but
Um,
often our differentiated value, if it really is unique, it's something that the customer's not really thinking about
right. And that's
necessarily.
really
So we got to
important.
wake them. We got to wake them up. Like we got to kind of say, hey, and what we're doing is we're clicking on the flashlight and pointing at a thing and saying, hey, have you ever considered this? And then we're having a little discussion about that.
There's a lot of, it's funny, this is not easy.
It's not.
It
If it
isn't.
was
And
easy, Drew, we
right.
wouldn't be here. We'd be
Yeah.
on the beach drinking out of a coconut.
Yeah. And uh so yeah, good. It's good that it's not easy. But I'm as I'm thinking about it for the CMOs in the audience, that part of this is an empathy play and understanding the real challenges that that a salesperson is going through. And when you're doing something like you described, there's a little bit of magic that you need to, or at least fancy footwork that you have to do, because you're going to present a proposition that they're not thinking about. They thought this was just about price.
Right.
And they said, this is the function I was looking for. I'm looking for a CMS. Here are the cheapest ones. Great. And they're not thinking about integration and metrics, for example,
Right.
as you described. So getting them there is
Well, which is why I got to get them. I got to get them there right out of the gate, in the beginning, right? At the very beginning of the sales pitch. This is why it worked so well at IBM. We would start there. So we'd come in and say, "Look, you're the head of sales enablement. Like, what's important to you, right? Oh, proving to your boss that this stuff works. That sounds like a pretty important thing. Never really thought about that. Well, no, actually, but it does suck every time I have to go talk to my boss about that. Well, what if you could do that? What if you knew exactly what was working and what wasn't? You'd want that, right? Like if we can do that right out of the gate, then they're going to go back to everybody else on their short list and say, "How do you guys do that?"
right. So there's elements of challenger sale in this, right? I mean,
Totally.
I'm channeling, but I'm thinking about,
Totally.
I've had many conversations with Brent.
It's
Uh,
very challenger sale.
okay.
It's almost like, so when I was at IBM, we were deep challenger sale. So when I first learned this stuff, we did to the letter challenger sale at IBM. And when we were heavy on the challenge part of challenger sale, because we were selling these giant deals that no one had budget allocated to. So I'm trying to get 50 million bucks out of you, out of your giant IT budget, and it's already designated to other things. So I had to come in and say, there is a screaming burning emergency in your business that you haven't even thought about. And usually the customer would go, no, there isn't. And we'd say, yes, there is. And then we would do this thing, which the challenger guys call rational drowning, which is we would bury you with the evidence that this horrible thing was happening. And if you didn't get on it now, man, bad news in the future. But when I left IBM and I went to the next startup, we were selling a thing that cost about 80 grand. And we didn't actually have to challenge people that much. We just had to put the light on it. So we come in and say, hey, you know, we all know we want to get to this result, but have you ever thought about this? Because if you really look at it, this is kind of the root cause of the problem in the first place. You ever thought about that? And most of the time, the customers would go, yeah, man, now that you say it, yeah, you're right. And then you say, look, like there's lots of other ways to solve this problem. These guys do, this works fine for some customers. This works fine for some customers. But for customers that look like you, your size, with your tech stack and whatever, what you actually want is something that ticks these three boxes, right? And the customer would go, yeah, right. And then we go, okay, let me show you how we do that. By the way, we're the only ones. And so it wasn't quite so challengery if I went when I went to a startup and the deals were smaller
Right.
and the how long it took us to close a deal was shorter. And so a lot of people I think have this reaction to challenger sale. Like it's like showing up and telling your customer they're stupid. And I think in most cases, what you're doing is you're teaching them something and you're saying, look, there's an aspect of this you might not have considered because you don't live in this space where you're thinking about solutions like this every day. You just got a problem you want to get solved.
So one of the things that you do talk about in the book a lot, and this is very real from our 2024 was pretty mixed year for a lot of the members of our community.
Yeah.
And the biggest single complaint was that the deals just got pushed off. Like the sales cycle, if it was 12 months, it became 18 months. And, the buyer just didn't want to take a chance on anything. Risk aversion was very high. And
So high right now.
I don't think it's really changed that much in the first quarter. If anything, it's gotten worse. So often they're losing to nothing. They're
Yeah.
losing to indecision.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because they had a champion inside. They had some people had gone through the dumb thing. They may have even had a proof of concept in place, and yet they couldn't get over the finish line because, as Brent would say, the pain of gain versus the gain of pain, whatever his phrase is. The gain
No, I know Brent. I know
right.
Brent stuff.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So they couldn't get over that hump.
Right.
And I'm wondering if in your thinking about this, when you're losing to nothing, how the sales pitch approach in your book could help these folks, and what do you do? Because look, they did everything. They showed they had the budget. They showed that they did the demo. They were really interested, and they didn't buy.
Yeah.
And it's not like they bought a competitor. They didn't buy.
Well, and the data on this it's terrible, right? So the data. Have you read Matt Dixon's book, The Jolt Effect?
Yes.
So his research, kind of dug really deep into this. And so if you've not read the Jolt Effect, like the research is they looked at 2.5 million sales calls. They analyzed it using some AI, and then the companies were participating so they could tell like what happened after the sales call. Did we get the deal? Did the deal progress? Did the deal close? All this sort of stuff. And then they analyzed what's going on in these calls, successful ones versus unsuccessful ones. And so what they found was 40 to 60% of B2B purchase processes end in no decision. And so when you scratch down on that no decision, in the majority of cases, it wasn't that they looked at their options and decided that the status quo thing was good enough. Like, so it wasn't a vote necessarily for the status quo, although in some cases it was. But in the majority of cases, they looked at all the options, and the problem was they couldn't confidently make a decision that they were sure they wouldn't regret. And therefore, they said, man, I'm really sticking my neck out here. I got to run this all the way up the chain and get the budget and whatever. And what if this goes sideways? What if I made a poor choice here and I'm going to get into trouble? And then they say, you know what? We're just going to kick the can down the road. We'll do it next year. Maybe somebody else will be in charge of this purchase and not me. And so they fall into no decision. So if you look at Matt Dixon's research on this stuff, he offers a handful of things that do seem to work. And so one of the things that works very well, and it's the O in Jolt, is to offer your opinion on what the customer should do. And so I think a really good sales pitch tries to minimize that indecision by helping the customer understand what their options are and when they should choose one over another. because I think the biggest part in this indecision is I don't know which one to pick because they all look the same. And so if we can describe to the customer, well, look, if I go back to my level jump thing and I say, look, like it, half of these are the same and they're just a CMS, man. And the other half of these are LMSs, but they're the same. And we're this different thing and we have components of this, but but the reason to pick us is this. Then it takes a lot of risk out of the decision because the person can go and explain to their boss why they made that choice and why they didn't choose the other one. And if the boss says, well, what about, pick some random company, then you could say, oh, they're one of these and they fit over here and here's why we didn't pick them. So I think if we can effectively paint a picture of the market and categorize approaches, it goes a long way towards the customer feeling confident about they made the right decision and why they made that decision. And particularly if we can say, look, like, in some cases, this might be a better decision for you. Like if you don't care about this and this, and the team is smaller and XYZ, you're probably better to go with that. And that helps the customer feel more confidence that, yeah, we're going to do that. So I think being able to, like, the things that help us with indecision is being able to paint a picture of the whole market so that the customer feels like, okay, I've done my homework. I understand how this whole market breaks out. And I understand when and why I would pick different approaches to the problem. So I feel more confident in the one that I picked, is the first thing. And then the second thing is, like, again, clearly articulating why we're different and therefore why pick us over the other guys. If everything looks the same, then this feels very risky.
So a couple of thoughts. By the way, it's the gain of change versus the pain of change. I just wanted to make sure for the audience I didn't completely forget certain things. But I also think that in this mix, urgency or lack thereof, that this getting to the finish line, even if they're confident in the decision, that's different than sort of, because I think this happens. Your champion says, yes, 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 let's do this. But the CFO says, no, 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 not now.
Right.
And that at that moment there's no perceived risk from the CFO of saying no now, because the urgency or the perception of the value and impact on this thing won't be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Right.
Right.
And so
Right.
you have thoughts
You
on that?
think,
On
like, I thought
urgency?
we'd see more of that in Matt Dixon's research and we didn't. Like
He has another book
I
that came
thought
out.
we'd see more of, it didn't come up in his research, on the digging into why the customer actually didn't choose. There was not this real feeling of, we didn't choose because we just didn't have the budget right now, or, I got shot down in finance. Like I wanted to do it, but finance killed me. That didn't come up as much as you would think. So it's possible they're, maybe customers are telling us that as an excuse or something, or maybe so. But he also did that research back a few years ago, and I think the market was very different.
Yeah.
I do
I mean,
think one of the
so
things that's interesting in his research is one of the natural things for us to do when we have that budget issue come up is we will either discount the price
right.
in an attempt to get it over the line. So we get all the way down, we hit this indecision. We will discount, or we will lean into like FOMO tactics, like all your competitors are doing this. If you don't get on the boat now, the competitors are going to be way ahead of you. And what Matt's research showed is both of those things drive down the likelihood of you getting a deal
Right.
if indecision is the root cause.
So what does solve the problem?
So what
How do we
solves
get
the
over
problem
that?
is helping the customer understand why us versus the other guys. Like the root cause in his research was not so much that, like in fact, if the customer is really, if the root issue is indecision and not really a budget thing, then offering a discount or leaning into the FOMO makes it worse. So that a good sales rep is going to have to judge, is this really an economic problem or is this an indecision problem? So if it's an indecision problem, then the way we solve that is we make the deal less risky. And so making the deal less risky, there's a whole bunch of things you can do. So one is you can break the deal up into little pieces. and say, okay, we don't have to bite off the whole bite now. We're going to do a phased rollout. And so let's do phase 1, and then we'll make sure that works. And you're not committing to the whole rest of the 9 phases. We'll do that. It's things like money back guarantee. If the thing doesn't work, we're going to give you your money back. It's like, we're going to give you the first 2-3 months for free. And if things are going sideways, then we can cancel the deal. It's things that take risk off the table.
Right.
And aren't necessarily just economic, right? Like the idea being that, oh, it's too expensive. So it's how do we reduce the perception of risk in this deal? And then, of course, like making sure you understand the market, making sure you understand our differentiated value, making sure you understand, the reward you're going to get from doing this. So here's the upside of the value and all that stuff. But I think there's a lot of things we can do to take risk off the table. Like breaking deals down into chunks is always a good one if the objection really is like we're worried this project might fail. And it's like, okay, well, how do we prove that the project's going to not fail and do it in a small way where you're not going to lose your job?
And see, it's funny. I don't know if they've sort of figured out they have this need. They go out and they get the 3 folks in that are on their short list. I don't know if they're worried that it's going to fail. I think they're worried about whether or not they're going to look good
Yeah.
in a short
Or look
period of
bad.
time.
Yeah. Or look bad.
Or look bad. Right. But
a
mainly,
lot of it is fear of looking bad.
okay. All right. So, okay. I'll let that go for the moment. But let's talk about old school sales leaders who say to their CMOs, just get us qualified opportunities and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. So now that I've been doing this work where, we get this cross-functional team together, we work on the positioning, and then we do the sales pitch in the end, right? And so it's interesting because I expected to get more complaining from sales, right? That we'd get to the sales pitch part and they're like, no, we got this. The pitch we got now is fine. Don't be touching my pitch, whatever. And in fact, it's kind of the opposite. Like the sales team does a lot of complaining about the pitch. And then marketers will often tell me, well, we tried to give them a new pitch and then they just instantly rejected it. And so I don't understand why they're so excited about it now. So I think sales leaders, they know a good pitch when they've got it, but they don't know how to build a good pitch. And they also know a pitch that they think is bad when they see it too. So if we don't give them something really good, they're just going to say, no, we're not using that thing. No. Sorry.
And importantly, I think I heard you say that you have to do it together.
You do have to do it together.
Right.
So
and that's
if
so
sales
true.
isn't involved in building the thing, you're never going to get it to stick over in sales.
So we start with agreeing upon the positioning.
So we start with agreeing upon the positioning so they understand the positioning, so they know where it came from. And that's usually the problem, is they don't understand how we got to the positioning we did. So if we got the whole group together, we're following a process to do the positioning, then sales understands where it came from. And if sales has a big objection to it and says, that ain't the value, man, like when I sell, we win on this, then we can have a discussion about it with everybody in the room and we'll see where we end up. So sales gets their voice heard. They get their input put into the positioning. They tend to like the positioning more. Then we take that positioning and we map it to a sales pitch that gives them a place to do discovery, that gives them a place to handle objections, that gives them a way to tell a story without it going blah, 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 blah. Like the big campaign about salespeople when marketing gives them decks is we got a 45-minute call and it's 35 minutes of blah, blah, blah before we ever get to the pitch part of the pitch. So we give them something that looks like what they could use. They like that better. Here's another just tactical tip. So when we do this stuff, we map out a storyboard for the sales pitch. And so what happens then, at least my recommendation of what happens then, so we get this storyboard for the sales pitch, and then marketing and sales works on the pitch together, right? So let's put it into pretty PowerPoints. Let's put the nice graphics on it. And usually if we do a demo, let's work together on the demo so that the demo follows this flow. So we got deck, demo, script, and marketing and sales work on that together, so that we get something that everybody's happy with, right? So now we work on it together. Now we got that. Now, if you want that to fail, what you do is you take it and you roll it out to the whole sales team and say, this is your new pitch. Good luck, Chuck. In 3 weeks from now, everybody in sales is going to come back and say, nope, this sucks. Can't do it. Don't. Because they're comfortable with the old pitch. Even if they're complaining about the old pitch, they're comfortable with the old pitch.
Right.
They got their little joke that they tell on slide 3 and whatever, and it's all smooth and they've done it 800 times and they're comfortable with it. Now you just gave them a brand new thing and they're like, they tried it out once or twice and it wasn't as good because they ain't comfortable with it. And so the better way to roll it out is marketing and sales work on the pitch together. And then what I recommend is we pull one rep, and ideally it's your best rep. So we
Right.
pull the best rep in. We're going to train her on it and say, okay, and we're going to train the heck out of you. Like you don't get to go out and let loose on a customer until you've done it internal. And this is the VP marketing, VP sales together, sitting together. We're going to train the heck out of that one rep. And then that rep is going to do a bunch of practice pitches with qualified prospects, and we're going to tune it. Because they'll be like, you know what, this graphic doesn't actually work, confuses people. Or when we say this word, people interpret it in a different way that we didn't expect, so we're going to fix that. So we do a bunch of practice pitches until the rep, and when I was in-house, this is how I would do it. Practice pitch, and then we tune it, practice pitch, tune it, practice pitch, tune it. And eventually the rep gets sick of this tuning part, and they come to me and they'll say, you know what? I think we're done. It doesn't need any more tuning. And this is the golden words you're looking for. I like this better than the old one.
You know you're there. Win.
So
Right.
now I have convinced my best rep that this is a better pitch than the old pitch. Now what I can do is I can record the rep doing that pitch. I can have the script match what my best rep is saying in the script. I can do a video of it and I can use that stuff for training. And I can take that rep and have them train everybody else.
Right.
So now I got my best rep standing up there going, listen, jokers, this is a way better pitch than the old one. Look at these deals I got in the pipeline. I did it with that pitch, not the old pitch. You're an idiot if you're using the old pitch. You should be using the new pitch. And now I got sales selling sales instead of marketing showing up and saying, you got to do this because I said so. And they're like, well, what does marketing know about my life? So that works 1,000 million times better than we're going to heave it over the wall and have everybody in sales try to jump on this new pitch.
Okay. So I'm gonna call out Peter Finter, CMO of KX, because I know that he's been listening very carefully to this conversation.
Hi, Peter.
And I also know that you may or may not have been able to implement something like this, and you probably figured out 3 things I should have asked April. So maybe you could hit April with a question.
Well, thank you very much for that, Drew. Yeah, I will say that I just love listening to April talk about this stuff. It not only reminds me of the good times when we worked together, but
oh my
also,
gosh, we worked together so long ago. Like we are so old. You have no idea. It was like it feels like another lifetime.
It truly does. But I've been a CMO of 4 different companies since then, and so I've had a chance to try this out a few times. And you're speaking my love language here. As I was going along, I was jotting down questions I should ask April, and then the next thing that Drew said was the question that I wanted to ask April. So thank you so much for bringing up Matt Dixon and FOMO and FOMO. Such an important thing for us to think about. Actually, the area that you haven't touched on at all, but is one which is relevant to a lot of enterprise software companies these days, is the role that product-led growth has in warming up prospects or getting prospects engaged, getting to a point where actually they're showing enough intent that you're going to be interested to point your seller at that particular prospect. How do you think about first call sales pitch decks in conjunction with PLG, product-led growth, or actions or motions that result from that? Because it's not usually the first time that company has ever engaged your company. It may be the first time the rep is spending time in this motion. So I'd love to hear you more on that, April.
Yeah, great question, Peter. So I've worked with a bunch of companies that have product-led growth motion. And so there's a couple of things that you really got to think about. So often, if what we've got is enterprise software, often we have a product-led motion, and that's aimed at end users. And so it's, there's a free thing and the end users can just sign up on the website and get going with it. Or it's, it's low cost enough you could slap down a credit card and use it. And so we've got end users and we've got positioning for that. because we're trying to get them in that funnel. And we're trying to explain why this is great. If you're hearing my dog bark, I'm going to apologize. And so we've got positioning for that. But often what we're doing is at the company is using that, like you say, as a signal for, oh, okay, we've now got 20 users in this organization. We should try to come in over the top and either sell them an enterprise-wide license for that thing or sell them something that's bigger and beyond that. And that positioning is often quite different because the reason the company wants to standardize on it is not necessarily the reason that an end user might want to just use it themselves. And so that difference in positioning often gets companies really, really tied up. So I'll give you an example. I worked with these guys in San Francisco called Postman, and they're this API. They're a tool for managing the entire API lifecycle. So all the way from creating APIs to testing, documentation, distributing the API. And so they've got this big product-led growth motion. Every IT team on the planet uses Postman. So if you say Postman, everybody knows them, but they know them in this narrow way as a testing tool, because that's what the end users in the product-led growth motion, they'll use them as a testing tool. They're the default testing tool. Everybody uses it. It's free. It's open source. You download it. It's good. But the way their sales motion actually works is they look for, if we have enough people using it in the testing group, then they come in over top and sell it a C-level person and sell them this whole different thing, which is, hey, you know what? The quality of your APIs would be much higher, and you would deliver an API much faster if the dev team were using the same tool as the testing team, because whenever the testing guys find something, it goes back to dev and they use a different tool to fix it. And, so they got to bring it into the other tool and whatever, and then it's got to go back here. And that introduces errors, but it also slows you down. And then while you're at it, think about it. After testing's done, what happens? Well, now you got to do documentation, and then you got to get it out to the people that are actually consuming the APIs. So if we really want to deliver this stuff fast in a very high quality fashion, what we need is a platform that does all of this, which is totally different than the messaging. If you go to their homepage, the homepage is talking about this free thing, and they're like testing, whatever. But the sales rep is coming in with this bigger tool. So you need to think about, well, who are we actually selling it to? And we need to have a value proposition that resonates for whoever you happen to be talking to. And often that product-led piece is completely different than what we're selling when we come in over the top. Now, other times what we have is, we got a free thing, and the sales motion is actually to upgrade the free thing to something that's paid, and it's the same users, the same buyers. We're just trying to say, oh, you need this extra feature. Sorry, you're gonna have to pay for that. But me personally, I haven't dealt with a ton of companies that have that motion, because everybody I deal with has a sales team. And which is part of my qualifying criteria. If you don't have a sales team, I don't work with you. So all the ones I've worked with have this other one where the end users, we have value proposition and positioning for the end user that has this solution. And then we have completely different value proposition and positioning for this over the top. Now I'm going to come in and sell you this thing. So those two things have to be totally different. And it's often where these companies get stuck, because they think they can sell at the executive level the same value proposition they sold to end user, and it's not at all.
So I think the key word there is persona, isn't it? It's who and what is their use case? What is the problem that you're solving for them? So beautifully said, April. Thanks. I love those thoughts.
And Peter, thank you for coming on. And April, we've just about run out of time, and I have so many more questions for you and thoughts to share. I'm going to attempt, but before I do my quick summary, how can people engage with you and find you?
So my website is aprildunford.com. Like, if you're interested in positioning stuff or this sales pitch stuff that we talked about, probably the best place to start are the books, because it'll give you a feel for my thinking on this stuff. And and Amazon has a sale this weekend. You buy the ebook, it's 99 cents. It only goes till Sunday. Woo, get it while it's hot. So you would only have to spend $1, so that's pretty easy. And then for folks that have, that are past that stage and want to go deeper on this stuff, I have a handful of resources. So I've got a newsletter, and you can sign up for that, where I pick a topic and we go really deep on that based on the stuff I'm hearing from my clients. And so again, if you go to aprildunford.com, you'll see the spot where you can sign up for the newsletter. And then I do a podcast too, same thing. Like it's me going deep on positioning topics. So it's really kind of narrow set of topics. We only talk about positioning stuff. It's called Positioning with April Dunford.
There you
Listen
go.
to it where you get your podcast, or you go to my website, you'll see it there. And then sometimes I pull in clients or other smart people. So there's an episode with me and Matt Dixon talking about the Jolt effect. And there's another episode where I brought Brent in to talk about his perspective on that stuff too. So if there's experts that I think have an interesting take on this stuff, I pull them in, or sometimes I have clients of mine in to talk about, their journey and how they did stuff. So there's one with the CEO of Postman, who I mentioned a few times, and their story is really interesting if you do this product-led growth stuff, and that's a good episode to listen to too.
Very cool. So I want to just there's a couple of things that I just have to sort of summarize with. One is, your job doesn't stop at positioning, and I know you know that, but the notion of co-developing positioning and then giving you the chance to co-develop the pitch is a big step, and something that I don't know if all of you are doing. So I think that's really important. And then another key insight in all of this was, get a champion salesperson to test it with you. And a last thing is, try it yourself. Like, be the salesperson yourself, put yourself on the line, walk in their shoes, and you'll get to see real, you'll have a lot more empathy for the challenges that salespeople have to close, but you'll get to understand and tweak it yourself. This can't be theoretical. It has to be something that you make work. All right. With that, this wraps up our public conversation with April. Thank you so much for joining us. And best of luck to you and all the things that you have going.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me.